I always feel like death is a motivator. You know, I feel like losing someone means now it's coming upon you to carry on what they didn't get to finish. It's also, in a way, you have to figure out the best way to mourn that person, but also to keep loving them and to keep, showing people what a great person they were.
And to keep honoring them.
Keep honoring them, sure. And look, we've always been cognizant of that in comedy, and I think for me it starts just having had and suffered tremendous loss is why I went to a comedy club. So, to me, comedy was always linked to death.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my guest today. I've been trying to wrangle this guy since Falco had a hit on the radio. It's unbelievable. The co-owner of The Stand, Cris Italia.
I'm not supposed to be on this podcast yet. I really believe that. Okay. I think maybe in 10 years, I might deserve to be on this podcast. But I just feel like I haven't accomplished enough yet. I mean, all your guests are amazing. So, to me, to be on a podcast means I might have something of interest to say and might have something of interest to share. So I really don't feel that way about myself.
Well, then we have something in common, because I don't feel that way about myself,
But you've survived so many different parts of this business. So there's something to be said about survival in this business and being able to succeed despite all the BS that has gone on over the years and the changes. You've adapted and you've survived and you've succeeded. You've adapted, you survived and succeeded. To me, there's nothing better than that. If you can be that person your entire career, then you've done it. You've made it. You've made it.
And now I just want to share something with you that because I'm always a big fan of systems with people and artists and doing things in a way where they have a vision and they have a step-by-step plan, and after that they have a plan. And the way I've always worked with these interviews and I work with artists is I've always been an instinct person. And so I knew why I was coming here, but I wasn't going to talk about it unless you brought it to my attention.
Right.
And what you just said has a lot to do with now what I want to talk about that you're not going to expect.
Oh, okay.
Adversity.
Sure.
The ups and downs.
Right.
Surviving. So if you don't mind.
There's been a little bit too much of that.
If you don't mind, could you just do me a favor and just pull this back for a second?
Oh, my God.
So you see what that says? That says wits.
That's right.
We're all laughing here.
Right.
All right? So why don't you explain why the name is Wits, and then you'll know. Then you'll know why you're on this podcast with me because of
Did I talk about that with you?
Because of the adversity that you've experienced, because the name of that studio is named after somebody who maybe a lot of people don't know.
Did I ever mention that to you? Had I not? No? Oh. It's hard. It's hard to talk about why the name of it is what it is. And for me, to talk about Dave, who was my former late partner.
Dave Kimowitz.
I look at telling the story of Dave, to me, is hard because it's not finished. And what I mean by that is that him not being here means, all we have is his legacy. And, my brother and I are, somewhat responsible
for
it. Paul, yes. My brother Paul and I are somewhat responsible for that legacy. Everybody who loves him continues to contribute to that legacy. So it's always been hard to talk about Dave because I just think it's not finished. So when something's not finished, you just kind of want to get to a place where you feel like, oh, now is the time we can talk about all of it. And, it's you look back at the time, it was very tragic ending for a person that was, probably the sweetest person I have ever met in my life. And it's been, crazy. It's like the last few years, just insane, to think of like what we've just kind of turned on, you know, like this was always the work we wanted to do, right? We wanted to create a brand that meant something to people and that, you know, really meant not only entertaining people, but taking care of people, giving them a platform, giving them a format to help their careers. And that's really all Dave ever stood for. So for me, when we decided to get into the digital world, there was no better name to call this thing. We wanted more of a generic, not generic, but I should say something that wouldn't alienate the rest of the comedy world. Calling it the Stand Network or something like that might make somebody who's doing something with the Comedy Store or the Cellar not want to work with us. And so I felt like it needed more of like a name that people trusted. And to me, no one exemplified that more than Dave Kimowitz, because everybody trusted him. He was just this guy that people loved. He was a guy that people knew that if they spoke to him, they would only ever get the best advice, and they would get truth. They would get honesty. And so Witz represents so much of that, and we call it Witz. It's his last 4 initials of his last name. And the smile is really his smile, because we used to call him the Cheshire Cat, because he used to always wear purple shirts, have a big goofy smile, and smoke those god-awful e-cigarettes. And we just said, how fitting would it be to like make this logo look like the Cheshire Cat and call it Witz? And, you know, it just all worked out. It all just came at us, and it just happened. So I'm very proud to name it after him, but I also know that there's so much work to do to continue to, you know, build it in his honor. And I'm excited about what's in front of us. I'm excited about, you know, starting the Fast channel and getting content going, and that it's a platform that's growing every day is great. You know, the viewership is building every day, and the library builds every day, and we're really, really excited about, you know, launching a podcast network called Witz. We're teaming up with Cineverse, which is an amazing company. And honestly, it's all the things that Dave and I talked about. You know, Dave and I always talked about doing this and doing that, and really being involved in all aspects of comedy so that we can better help the people we loved, which is comedians. We love comedians. We're comedy junkies. We met at comedy clubs and watched comedians, and we didn't care really about anything else. It was just the two of us kind of just saw something in comedians that maybe a lot of other people don't. I don't know, you know, but we just knew we wanted to help. And it was, in the beginning, it was 3 of us. It was my old friend and partner now, Patrick Milligan. You were about to do it. It was Dave, and it was me, and then my brother eventually came along, and really, you know, my brother Paul looked at what we were doing and said, well, how can we do this in a much bigger way? And you know, I think he saw our vision and said, I can execute this. Let me show you how I can do it. And once he showed us a way, I think it just opened up all kinds of possibilities. And I think it was that. It was Paul's ability to execute and Dave's ability to always stay positive that made the vision we had a reality. We just didn't think it was ever going to happen. But, you know, to start out as, you know, doing some production and then small production, then getting into management, we had no idea what we were doing when we first started. And, you know, to eventually build a club and a restaurant that everybody, you know, loves. It's, you know, it's cool. You know, it's great. It's what we wanted. We wanted, when we were going to comedy clubs in the early 2000s, this is what we envisioned. We envisioned hanging out in a place that was a cool hang. And, you know, there was a lot of elements from the other clubs, right? Because Caroline's had that, going on, I think, for a long time. I think.
Well, they say always, I like to say, study greatness.
That's right.
Imitate greatness, become great. So
I agree with that.
If you'll oblige me, first of all, I just want to say thank you for talking about that.
Yeah.
And
he's a special person.
Because I always say that tragedy is your greatest friend if you let it to be your greatest friend.
He certainly motivates us every day.
And everything, I mean, it could be argued, which is unbelievable to even think about in life, it could be argued that if he was still on this earth plane, that this whole vision might have been a little more delayed, or things might have gotten in the way.
Yeah, you never know.
And I just want to share something with you that some people know, but I'm not saying this to bum you out or whatever, but just the example, just so you know. So I was married when I was younger, and my wife passed away at 23. And at the time when it happened, like what happened to you, you're like, what the fuck am I going to do? How am I going to go on? What are we doing? How I had my whole thing planned out here, just like you guys had your whole thing. And you don't know, but the world has this plan. And sometimes the world has this plan where somebody has to be taken out of this earth plane for you to grow and move in other directions. And when I look in the eyes of my children, who I'm going to see later today, I say to myself, holy shit, if that person didn't leave, I never would have these boys. I never would have this life.
Right.
And so if Dave, God forbid, that hadn't happened, there wouldn't be this logo, there wouldn't be this vision, there wouldn't be this honoring him, and there wouldn't be this love that goes there. There'd be love and everything else, but it'd be a different kind of thing. And so it's this weird thing that the world does to you that takes the person out of your life and their life. Obviously, they're the ones that suffer most because they're gone. And then we're left. My mother always used to say, death is sweeter than divorce, because divorce, you're always, the person's always there, but when somebody's gone, at least you have that vision of who they were and what it was. Right. And there's another thing you said that's fascinating about Dave, and you said earlier about you, and you said a little later about the vision of wits.
Right.
You said, I don't belong on this podcast because I got more to do.
Yeah.
Dave had more to do.
That's right.
Wits, we got more to do.
Yeah.
And going back to
that should be the tagline.
But going back to the craziness of death and tragedy, everybody who dies had plans that night. They had things they wanted to do. I always say the greatest ideas, the greatest things, the projects, the most extraordinary films, television shows, podcast studios, the ideas for them, they all reside, most of them, in one place, the cemetery, because people don't have the balls to move forward, or when they go through a tragedy, they just pack it in and are like, F it, I'm out of here.
It's easy to do that.
And you didn't say F it, and you talked about me earlier, and one of the things I've never said is F it. I'm gonna keep going and do what I do. I love what I do.
I mean, to lose someone that young, and be able to continue to perform how you did is remarkable. I mean, I always feel like death is a motivator. I feel like losing someone means now it's coming upon you to carry on what they didn't get to finish. And it's also, in a way, you have to figure out the best way to mourn that person, but also to keep loving them and to keep, showing people what a great person they were.
And to keep honoring them.
Keep honoring them, sure. And look, we've always been cognizant of that in comedy, and I think it, since, oh man, it's like it all, for me, it starts like, just having had and suffered tremendous loss is why I went to a comedy club. So, to me, comedy was always linked to death.
Comedy was always linked to death. Explain.
Absolutely. Well,
so let's go back a little bit. So When did you realize comedy was linked to death the first time? Was it before you got in the business?
It was definitely before I got into the business. Some people know the story. I was a volunteer EMT during 9/11, first responder. I was a journalist at the time, and decided that I would join a local volunteer EMT crew, and I just happened to be there on 9/11 when it all happened. And
how long had you been an EMT volunteer before 9/11?
At that point, it was maybe 6 months. I was embedding myself as a journalist. That was the whole thing.
So where were you that morning?
That morning I was at One Police Plaza, working on leads for a story, and that's when chaos broke out. And One Police Plaza is just a few blocks away from World Trade Center. So I think after you kind of absorb all of that for a few weeks, you get to a place where it's like, well, what do I do now? And for me, it took a long time just to kind of reconnect with the world. And the thing that actually, after almost a year, that kind of led me back into society was listening to comedy albums. And I don't know what happened one day. I think somebody sent me a link to something, and I think it was really funny. And
do you remember who it was?
It was, I believe it was like a Richard Jenny bit or something.
You really know how to tie things in.
I love Richard Jenny. Yeah, that was his death was tough too, because we didn't know each other well. We had met a couple times, but
I had lunch with him a month before.
He's a fantastic. Just a fantastic comedian. So
one of the greatest.
And I think then I went from Richard Jenny to Robert Schimmel, again, another person who passed away too soon.
Can I tell you a story that Robert told me?
Yeah.
And again, I don't know if it's public knowledge. I don't know, and I hope I'm paraphrasing. I'm not going to get everything right.
Yeah.
But Robert had so many lives because he was dying so many times.
Which is what appealed.
And he just came back over and over again.
That was the appealing part.
After dying. And he told me the story about when he was in this hospital bed. This is before I even did the podcast, before anything. It would have been a great podcast story. I don't think I've ever told this. Because I asked him, I was always inquisitive. I was asking, what, tell me a moment. I always talk about these holy shit moments that people have that they're life-changing moments. And he was saying he was in a hospital bed and he was dying, and he knew that he had very little chance of coming back. And he actually did come back from this, but he had all these tubes in him and whatever, and his, family was outside, and they were, and they kept coming in, and his dad comes in, and he says, Dad, listen, man, I can't do this anymore, so I just want to let you know I love you, and I'm going to just, when you walk out that door, just hang with the family, and I'm just going to pull these tubes off of me and these needles, and I'm going to fucking jump out that window, and I'm going to kill myself. And his father says, okay, Robert, I love you. I understand totally. Before you do that, could you just do me a favor and just wait a minute? I just want to just go outside and compose myself, and I want to just come back in and say the proper goodbye to you. And he says, okay, Dad. His father leaves and walks in with his children and says, hey, Bob, why don't you tell them that? And that saved his life.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing.
Incredible, right?
Yeah. And I was told a similar story, and then I actually saw it get performed by Mike DeStefano, who
love him,
and eventually would be the face on our logo. He's He's the Stan's logo. He's a silhouette.
Imagine that. The Jerry West of the Stand.
Right.
Like
He sure is the Jerry West of the Stand. Which he would love, by the way. He would totally love it.
Before,
he'd eat it up.
Before you did the logo, like I don't, and I could be wrong.
A lot of dead people on our logos.
I don't remember the logo being, what was the logo before and when did it turn to be the logo?
It was from the beginning.
It was from the beginning.
From the beginning. He was always on. Our logo on stage was always him on it. We've changed where the position of him.
Do you think we just wore black because of this podcast talking about?
So, yeah. I'm always, I always have these people close to my heart, right? So, like, I always think about them every day. In a very subconscious way, I talk to them. You know what I mean? Like I think about them before I make decisions. I think of them about, how they would do things and how they would handle things. And, it's part of my everyday thoughts. And like, he was one of the first guys when I was at the clubs, just going to clubs and like learning about the comedy scene and everything, that kind of like saw right through me. Like he didn't think I was, some people thought I was industry. Some people thought I was weird. I was just a fan. I was just going to shows. And I met Patrick, and Patrick's also a very weird guy. And, we just got along because we just loved comedy. But Mike was the first guy who said, "You're in pain. You're actually in pain. I can tell you're in pain. You're here for another reason. You're not here. You're here to be saved." And
he was an old soul.
He was that guy. And, it took a lot to get me out. My routine was work as much as f***ing possible so I could not think about other things. And then eventually, like I said, the comedy albums, one of the other albums that I love is Andrew Dice Clay's The Day That Laughter Died. To me, that's the greatest album of all time. And, listening to that, I wanted to experience it in a club. So I started going to the clubs. And in the clubs, I met Patrick and eventually meet Mike. And Mike was this guy who eventually brought me into his little circle. And he had a very small circle of people he trusted. And he basically took me under his wing and sort of, he showed me how to cope. He showed me how to forgive people that may have done wrong things to me over my years. And he showed me how to properly mourn. And, he has this amazing story you could watch online called Franny's Last Ride, where he talks about, his wife and her last moments on the back of his motorcycle. She was in hospice, but they still mustered the strength to put her on a motorcycle and go out into the highway. And, I'm not going to tell the story. It's just an amazing story. Everyone should go watch it. It's on YouTube. And he also told the story about how he was going to take his own life after his father passed away. And he felt like, I'm a former addict. I know exactly how much it's going to take to die. I'm going to bury my dad. I just buried my wife. There's nothing left for me here. I'm just going to do this. And, it'll be very painless. I know exactly how to do it. And he had been going to a Buddhist, he had been seeing a Lama and practicing Buddhism. And he felt so guilty about going because it would make him feel really good. And he stopped going.
Now, don't lose your place, but I think what's fascinating when you talk about this, as I like to talk about myself sometimes, the cobbler has holes in his shoes. Right. The apple tree can't eat the apples. The corn husk can't eat the corn. And so Mr. DeStefano, helped you get through everything that you needed to get through, yet he was struggling helping himself. Which is how, him telling me this story and then eventually him performing it. So keep going. Don't lose it. He was on a plane on his way to New York. And the monk that he had been seeing, the Lama he had been seeing, was from West Palm Beach. And he hadn't seen him in a while. Jewish monk? Yes, Jewish monk. Just checking. I hadn't seen him in a long time. And they, I forget the name of what they do, but I guess the monk puts his head on your forehead,
and he takes away, he holds your hands, and he takes away all your negative energy, and he gives you all of his positive energy. And so Mike gets up to go to the bathroom on the plane, and, he's set to go do this. He has all this, rage inside him, and I just want to get off this planet. It's done. I'm done. And as he's walking to the bathroom, he just hears this monk yell out, West Palm Beach, West Palm Beach. And he turns around, and he sees the monk reaching out for him on the plane. And he just goes, you motherfucker, man. I was on my way to do this. What are you doing to me? And then, of course, he takes his hands, puts his head up against the monk's head. And he said as soon as that happened, he had no feelings of killing himself. It was all gone. Everything was positive. He came to New York, did what he had to do, came back, and then started his life, pretty much. And that's, how he got into comedy eventually was, after that whole experience. So he had told me about that, and it really showed me, like, there is life after death, there's life to live, and there's you should use it to motivate yourself. And so, even when Mike passed away in 2011, it was part of a trio of people that were very influential to me. It was Greg Giraldo, Patrice O'Neal, Mike. They all died within months of each other. And for the New York comedy scene, it was a crushing blow. It was devastating. I mean, I don't think we've ever had a year that tough in New York City to lose those three people. They were giants. I mean, they were giants before being giants. They were all on their way. Greg had already, achieved so much success. Patrice was right on the cusp. Mike was right on the cusp. So to me, like, it was devastating, but I knew that then there was work to do. I knew like these guys were, we had to keep them going, and for me, there was no better way to do that than to establish a place that signified who they were. The vibe, the culture, the standards of the three of them. They all had three different styles, but they were what everyone should aspire to in terms of comedy. They just did it differently, but they all did it in a very excellent way. You know what I mean? Like, I could put those three up against anybody any day of the week, and I, probably would win any contest. You know what I mean? They were just that good. And so for me, I felt like whatever we build has to match that persona. It has to be smart comedy. There has to be something kind of for everybody. There has to be kind of like a no bullshit thing. And there has to be a place where Patrice would hang out, because... So let's talk. Because if Patrice didn't hang out, it would be disappointing. If you couldn't get Patrice to stay, then you knew you did something wrong. So first time I met... Well, not the first time I met Patrice, but the first time I saw him, because I knew him from Boston. He was Bruiser O'Neal. Oh, yeah. But the first time he came to New York, I smiled and I said, "How you doing? Welcome to the club." And he said, "My God, look at those teeth. You could eat an apple through a white picket fence." And then Rich Voss said something like him, "Yeah, but you could floss with barbed wire," or something like that. And honestly, hanging out with those guys was the time of my life. But this is important. I want to ask you, because this is because I obviously had many clubs and the Boston Comedy Club. Boston was a place where I love. It was like one of my first. I didn't know you then. That's the only problem, is that we didn't really get to. I didn't know me then. Right, but that was the club. Everybody thinks it was the Cellar, but that was the Hang. The Hang was the Boston Comedy Club, because you could hang around. Which is what I always wanted, whereas I played against Sam's in Boston and all these places. It was always about the Hang. It had the vibe, man. It was totally there. It was like Anne Frank's Comedy Attic. And the thing is, like, I get it. Like, some people, they see, like, there's divey clubs, but then there's cool divey clubs. Yours was a cool divey club because it had the vibe. Had the vibe of everybody wanting to be there, and everyone, like, it didn't matter where you were performing, you'd wind up at the Boston Comedy Club that night. So if I went to go see a show at the Cellar, I'd always wind up at Boston, because whether I was going to see a show at Boston or not, I knew everybody was going to be there. So I would hang out there and, like, be the weird guy just waiting for someone to talk to me.
And it was a weird hang because there was not a lot of space.
No, there wasn't.
And they had a music club downstairs, but a lot of people where they hung, I don't know why, but they hung outside a lot of times, just talking outside, like tons of comedians holding court and people walking by, and it just and it was a rotation of people. No real drinks outside, nothing, just a rotation of people. Just I
loved watching Patrice
hold court. Now I just want to ask you about this.
Most fun thing ever.
Because the toughest part for me about working in a comedy club and. It's so funny because when I go to the Comedy Cellar, Gina Savage is there, and she was the manager of my club. So the way I did my club, I had a different philosophy. My philosophy was, let me find all the people that I think are extraordinarily talented that don't work at these other places.
That's right.
Let me be a contrarian, kind of like when Fox... If you're old enough to remember this, the Cosby Show on Thursday was must-see TV, and that was the show, number one show. And Fox had The Simpsons on Sundays. And one year they said, you know what? Let's move The Simpsons to Thursday opposite Cosby. And everybody said, what the f*** are you doing? This is crazy. But it's contrarian television.
Right.
And I looked at my club the way I built it because when I got there, a lot of people don't know this, but it was a club called the Paper Moon. Eddie Brill ran it. Rick Messina, who manages Tim Allen and Drew Carey, ran it as well. And I came in, and it was just like I pitched this Boston Comedy Club idea. I must have been an idiot because who wants to do the Boston Comedy Club in New York? But I was from Boston.
Most of the guys were from Boston.
And I thought I could bring people in and do a mixture of things, and young people and teenagers who don't get a lot of work, but who I thought were talented. Because everybody always told me, if you have anything, Barry, you have an eye for something.
Right.
And so I'd be having these guys on, and women, Sarah Silverman, Dave Chappelle, Wanda Sykes, Jeff Ross, Dane Cook, Bill Burr, all these young people.
To be the first to put them up and really give them the right amount of time that they needed.
The first comedian on my stage who helped me hook up the wires and the lighting was an 18-year-old redheaded kid from Boston, Louis C.K.
Unbelievable.
He was the first guy on stage, my first management client ever. I loved him.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, I hope you wouldn't mind me saying this, but one of the most beautiful moments I've had in a long time is when he texted me and he said, Barry, I'm at the Improv on Melrose. Will you come by? And I'd love to see you. And I had reached out to him a while because I sent him this letter that he sent me like 15 years ago, and I congratulated him. It was this hilarious letter where he just completely was like Patrice did, like roasting me, whatever. And just to see a guy as a man who's been through, again, adversity.
Right, everything.
And one of my philosophies about Louis, which I've shared a few times, and I'll share with you because I don't expect you to know it. I don't understand our business in this sense. I understand a lot about the business, but this is one thing I don't understand. Why is it that the comedy business doesn't have just bear with me here, like a commissioner?
Right.
Like in the NFL, a guy, you kicked your girlfriend in the elevator. We have the videotape. Okay, you want to sit down here? Joe, what's the penalty on that? 8 games, no pay? Okay. 8 games, no pay. Take it easy, pal. Okay, who's next? Oh, you punched your girlfriend in the face? Okay, let's go with the last precedent. Joe, what was that again? 8 games. Okay, what? So people do things that we're all human beings. We all make mistakes. And the question is, should we be judged for those mistakes? And so if you look at, and I hope Louis wouldn't be mad if I said this, but if you look at the entire body of Louis C.K.'s personal and professional life, and then you isolate this moment that he was highlighted, which is like this much of the pie.
Nothing. Really suspect.
And then the comedy business and the television business colludes. He can't be on television anymore. He can't produce any television shows. He can't do an hour special on whatever.
That only takes away from us.
And it's like, but the public will go and see him at Madison Square Garden, whatever. But we look at adversity, and the world took that away from Louis based on an action, whatever, or actions. And what did he do? Did he pack it in? No. He's a billion times more successful than he was. He has his own website that's like a store. You can get everything there you want. And he's still the most, or one of the most respected people. And so sitting across from this guy and standing next to him and talking to him as a man who's been through the fire and out, and knowing him as an 18-year-old kid, you know, it's just amazing how this podcast comes full circle, because anybody out there listening, I don't care if you do comedy, I don't care, whatever, if you don't get the kicked out of you, then you have so much less of a chance to be successful.
Both literally and physically.
Yeah, you have to have your legs broken. You have to have the business with you. You can't have everything go well. And now I know there are examples of people, and I don't know if Jerry would say differently, but like Jerry Seinfeld, I think that things have gone pretty smoothly all the way through.
He's had a pretty charmed life.
And it can happen.
Yeah.
There's always examples of it happening in every, well, I don't care if you're a cupcake maker. There's the person who works from they're 4 years old doing cupcakes, and then there's the person who just one day just bites into a sprinkles cupcake and says, I think I can make something better, and it takes off. There's always going to be examples of that. But if you want to put the most lottery balls in the hopper of how to win the lottery in this crazy world and get where you want to go, you have to be able to take the hits.
Sure.
What was it that Confucius said? Knock down 7 times, get up 8.
Right.
Hey everybody, it's Barry Katz, and I wanted to talk to you about Blueprint for Success. This is a community that I put together during the pandemic to help all artists of every walk of life in the entertainment business. No matter where you are in that part of this journey, it's designed to help you. There are podcasts with people that will inspire you, like Kevin Hart, Judd Apatow, Bill Burr, that you can't find anywhere else but on this program that I've interviewed, to times where we get to talk to executives in the business that you would never have access to tell you what you need to hear and to answer your questions, to all sorts of different videos and master classes designed to help you get to the promised land. That's what the Blueprint for Success is. Doesn't matter whether you want to be a stand-up comedian, a sketch performer, a podcaster, an actor, an actress, director, writer, social media person, whatever you want to be. I've been doing this for 40 years. I've had the honor and been humbled to represent people like Chappelle, Wanda Sykes, Louis C.K., Dane Cook, and probably over 20 other people who went from a studio apartment to being a multi-millionaire and a household name. And I want that for you, and I wanted to take the time with this program to be able to help you on your way there, to get there and to heighten and increase the trajectory of your career. Blueprint for Success is the way to go. I'm proud to be a part of this program, and I'd be proud to have you to be a part of it too. And so when I look at you, and you talked about comedians, and this is the toughest part to me about the side that isn't death in the comedy business as an entrepreneur like you are and the comedy person. Comedy is a very, very extraordinarily small group of people who are undeniably, holy shit, I cannot fucking believe what I'm seeing right now kind of comedy.
Right.
And when you run a comedy club, you have all these spots you have to fill. If you're the Comedy Cellar now, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there's 74 shows a week that they have to fill.
Yeah.
74 shows.
Yeah.
Now, Cris has an enormous amount of shows as well.
Right.
And I'm going to use this example if you don't mind. So let's say Cris has 100 spots that he's filling. And there might be more, but there's 100 comedians that are at least doing one spot that week. What Cris understands and what I understand, but maybe what the audience doesn't understand, is there's one person who Cris believes is the most extraordinary and the best, and there's one person who's the 100th best.
For sure.
And you always have to put people on that are in the lower tier of your 100. And so on any given show, when you go see a show, what Cris is hoping for is like a Maddie Weiner goes on, and in her time of doing comedy, because she hasn't been doing it for 30 years or 20 years, there's going to be some shows that don't go as well, and some shows that do go well.
And we definitely test people.
Yeah.
We test people.
Or let's say Aaron Berg or whatever. There's going to be some shows in the beginning when Aaron, 5 years ago, when Aaron's going on, they're not going to be as good. And so that's the position that Cris is in. When he mentions DeStefano, O'Neal, Giraldo, I don't expect him to tell you right now, but if he were to take his best 100 that work regularly at the club, I can guarantee you he may not say that anybody of the 100 are of that level.
It's hard. Those guys
and so we're in this crazy business where it's a 10-year plan with comedians. And if he doesn't believe in people and see a little germ in what they're doing and support them, he's not going to have a chance to get that Patrice or Giraldo or DeStefano, because those people weren't O'Neal, DeStefano, and Giraldo when they started. They were having inconsistencies too.
Right.
And so how do you deal with the fact that when you look at a lineup, let's say, I went to see a show last night. Thank you for taking care of me and my boys and my assistant. And I'm watching the show, and I'm thinking to myself, as I'm watching, I'm thinking...
Downstairs or upstairs?
Downstairs.
Okay.
So I'm thinking to myself, okay, which of the people here would Cris think, this person I'm going to push because I know that they've got whatever going for them. This person is personality driven, and I know even though they don't have the material, they're going to get by.
Right.
And then this person I'm going to have go on here because they're the smartest, but they're not going to be able to handle things later on. Right. And I'm just thinking as I'm watching the show, there
is an algorithm you create, basically, to find out.
So how do you deal with the fact that you know in your heart you've got this multi-million-dollar operation that you're trying to grow, and you know you don't have the amount of extraordinary, undeniable comics to fuel that, so you have to bet on people and hope that they do well. How do you handle that?
So on any given night, you typically have 3 or 4 literally killers on the show, no matter what, because it's New York City, and for the most part, you're going to do that. You're going to have a Dan Soder, you're going to have a Mark Norman, you're going to have, a Bonnie McFarlane, Rich Voss, and then you're going to have that person that you want to see how they react to being on a lineup like that. And there's a lot of comics we test to see how they respond. They don't know what's happening. They don't know why they're on that specific lineup. But there's been so many moments where we've specifically put somebody last in the order to see how they close out the show compared to what we already know the other ones can do. Because we want to know if that person's ready. And if that person does a great job, once, twice, 3 times, all of a sudden you can just see them growing in front of your eyes, you know, and now that person can be trusted to perform on different days, on any, you know, weekend lineups, on lineups where there might be, you know, it might be loaded with all these other comedians that are killers and have tons of experience, and you keep working those people in, you know. And there's another thing I believe, and so does Patrick, who does a lot of the booking. I put a lot of stock in hosts, and I think you did too back in the day.
Yeah, because Boston was born out of the headliner being the host.
Right, and I think a lot of comics these days, they don't realize what an important role the host is. Sometimes they look at it as a demotion of some kind, or they look at it as some kind of like, oh, I gotta host this show because I'm not good enough, or they think I'm not good enough. It's like, no, actually, we're making you host because we want to see you step up and we want to see you kill for the entirety of the show, and have to come back after each comic and try to keep that crowd going, rolling right into the next. And also those first, you know, 8 or 10 minutes up front are the most important 8 or 10 minutes of the show. So on a showcase style room like we have, host to us is probably the most important role you have, and I think a lot of comics miss that somehow. But there are comics that get it.
I think the reason why they miss it is because when you get to us, and those of you who aren't in the comedy business, so when you go see a show, let's say you go see Brad Williams at the Grove or wherever, Town Hall, you're going to see him. Maybe there's a feature act that goes before him for 20 or 30 minutes. Maybe there's a host. And there's a pecking order of how it goes in those shows. So when you look at how you get to the top, sure, that's how it is. So the host isn't important. The host could die a miserable death on the Brad Williams show. It doesn't matter. They're there to see Brad Williams.
They're immediately forgotten.
But when you're at a showcase club, it's different, and that's the thing. But hosts are always considered to be, in the comedy business, the lowest and first position, but it is the most important.
It's so important, and like that's why you hate to hear when somebody says, "Hey, I don't want to host anymore." It's like, yeah, but I need you to host. You know, like I don't have the next guy ready yet. I don't have the next group of hosts ready yet. We're trying to find the next great, you know, host that'll take us through the next 6 months. So there's a host rotation, right? And you're constantly grooming and trying to find those people because it's so important.
So let's talk about that. And you might not want to talk about this, but I want to talk about this. So it's been about 13 years.
Yeah.
Okay, since you started.
Yeah.
Tell me 3 people that were new in 2012 that you started putting on, or in that area of the club's first year or two, that were your club's kind of proteges. They might have been working at other clubs in the late night or whatever, but you know, you sort of, there was something that happened between you guys, your proteges, and tell me what's happening with them now. Tell name 3.
The first one that comes to mind, and probably everybody might even have this answer, is Pete Davidson. I mean, I saw him when he was 16, working at some dungeon room in Times Square, and I said, "Wow, this kid, for some reason, has a whole room in the palm of his hand," and I don't even think he understands how good he is.
What was that first joke he had? Like he said, I'm thin. It's like I have problems with wind. You know, I just remember that. Just some saying problems with wind.
About, you know, I'm dating cougars, you know, and then something about her being 25. And, you know, like that's how he had a lot of great jokes for a 16-year-old.
And again, if we may, since it's been the theme of the podcast, adversity. His father died in 9/11.
And that's where he and I definitely linked on that immediately. He certainly took to me because of that reason. I helped him. He had this like some type of Frank Sinatra deal going on with Nick Cannon, and he's talked about it since. But like it was like one of those things where they owned everything he did, right? So at some point, he wanted to do like those MTV shows like Guy Code and stuff like that, and he couldn't do anything under the current contract. So he asked me to go speak to Nick Cannon and his people to try and get him out of it.
I did Nick Cannon's first special.
Listen, Nick's a nice guy. He's a very nice guy, but his people are, as you would imagine.
Tough.
Right? And they were all like, we're not letting Pete out of this. We see a lot of potential here. And I'm like, yes, so does everyone else, but you're not letting him do anything. So, I'm here to talk about the contract he made him signed was something that he went home, told his mom to sign because he needed a guardian to sign it. And she had no idea what she was signing either. She was just being yelled at by her son to sign it because he wanted to work with Nick Cannon.
And lesson number one for anybody listening who's in the comedy business: don't sign anything.
Without a lawyer, right?
Don't sign anything.
Yeah, I agree.
Ever.
So, we went through the motions. We finally got him out of that deal, and he was extremely happy about that. And once we opened, he was one of the first young comics to really get into our rotation. He was 17, 18. We were working with him. We were managing his career at the time. And he was just a special kid, he was just great. We just saw his ability to adapt.
Was he the first management client of the...
No, our first management client was actually this guy, Danny LaBelle. Do you remember Danny?
Yeah, a heavyset guy.
Yeah,
he has a podcast called Modern Day Philosophers.
That's right.
Yeah.
I love Danny.
He's a wonderful...
And our second client was actually Andrew Schulz.
Wow.
Yeah. So
he was another one.
Very young Andrew Schulz. This is before we even opened.
Sounds like you have a pretty good eye, too.
I thought so. Then we started working with guys like Pete and
who was your third protege?
Third,
that you
I would say within the club. So so there's Pete, who's like obviously become a superstar. But then there's guys who have carved out amazing careers for themselves that really grew up in our place, like someone like Paul Verzi, right?
I love him.
Paul's great. I mean, he's just this amazing comic, great storyteller, and
great HBO special.
He was a guy that he didn't think he can get past the cellar. He just thought you had to know enough people, and he didn't know anyone at the time. So for him to kind of get on our radar, and we saw something in him that I think a lot of people didn't. He was a workhorse, and one night, I think it was just actually opening night. We had Dane Cook and Artie Lang go back to back. Neil Brennan also. It was Neil Brennan, Artie Lang, Dane Cook. And Dane Cook in 2012 was at his height. It was really coming off arenas.
We were doing arenas. Huh?
Right. And Dane was nice enough to stop in, on our opening night.
Neil Brennan is a big part of my history, as you know, because you used to see him at the Boston at the door.
Absolutely, yeah. And so we had to shift things around, and Paul was scheduled to go on that show. But when all those guys stopped in, we had to move Paul down the line. I mean, when Dane went up, people's jaws were on the floor. They couldn't believe in this small 90-seat room was this superstar that they were watching on opening night. It was magical, right? And then Artie Lang had just come back from his injuries, when he tried to hurt himself and do bad things to himself. This was one of his first spots back. People were cheering Artie Lang, Artie Lang, as he was leaving the stage. And now Paul's there, and I look at him, and he looks at me. I go, "You'll be fine." And he went up and killed, and it's one of the most proudest moments because here's a guy we were nurturing, and it worked. It was actually working, and you could see it happening. So I'm always proud of guys like that. I'm always proud of guys like Derek Gaines. I'm proud of guys like Monroe Martin that have really established themselves in the New York scene from our club, and they got passed everywhere else, and they've toured the country. And to me, to watch people grow like that's the best part. Stavros Halakis, Tim Dillon, all these guys came through our place, and Hannah Berner, Nikki Glaser. Nikki's one of my favorite people on the planet, and she grew so much just being at the stand as much as she was. And I know she's did other clubs in New York City, but there was always a synergy with us. And I just feel like she felt the same way about us as we did with her. And even now that she's become a superstar, she always checks in. And that's when you know you did something right. Is when, someone like that just checks in every once in a while just to see how things are going. And
an example of that, and I was sharing this earlier today and yesterday, what you just said in the audience in your life, this is how you know that you're doing something right.
Right.
You're walking through a bus station, you're walking through an airport, you're walking through a casino, you're just walking through and you hear your name being called and you're like, what's going on? And they call it again, and then you turn around, you realize it's somebody you know who called your name out and saw you there. And then you greet them, you hug them, whatever, you talk to them. And when you leave them, you realize, holy shit, they like me. They want to talk to me. They feel something, the connection with me. Because how many times have we all been walking through an airport or a busy mall or anywhere and saw somebody we know and like, oh fuck, let's go over here, And so in a comedy club setting, what you said of checking in is important. Or something you told me the other day, which I loved. You said you get the call, and the first time it happened, it's like Chappelle wants to do a pop-in at whatever, midnight or whenever the hell it is or whatever. And this is how you're going to set it up. And you said something incredibly fascinating that I think that the comedy world would love to know is that every artist out there, they want to work a sold-out crowd. They want it to be packed. They want every seat sold. They don't want to look and see anything like that. Not Dave Chappelle when he does the Stand or anywhere else. He tells Cris and the owners, listen, only put 70 seats on sale. I don't want it to look sold out. I want it to look like it's just a regular late night show where I'm walking in, I'm doing it, and we'll put a few comics on before me or whatever, make it look like I'm just whatever, and that's it. And when
I guarantee he's thinking about the Boston Comedy Club when he's doing it.
I hope so,
because that's exactly what it is. It's that you want to replicate the way you worked on material when you were younger, and I believe that's what he's trying to do. But everywhere he goes, no matter what it is, it's always going to be this massive crowd that knows him and knows all his stuff. We don't even put his name on the ticket. We just say smoking headliner. and if people know what that is, they know what it is, and that's how his shows get filled up. So some people don't even know what they're buying half the time.
But can you imagine any comic that you know in the world that will reach out to somebody and say, hey, listen, only put 2/3 of the tickets up for sale, and don't seat them all around the same place just seat them, let them walk in and sit wherever the fuck they want.
They've seen that, and other people want to replicate that. Like Tim Dillon does that, Marcelo Hernandez does that. So you could tell that people emulate greatness, obviously.
So let's talk about that, because we'll get back to that for a second, then we'll wrap up with a few questions. So tell our audience what you saw at the Cellar, what you saw at Caroline's, what you saw at the comic strip, what you saw at Gotham, what you saw at all the other places, and the little things about each place that you tried to incorporate here.
That's fun, because I've had amazing experiences.
And then as you're doing it, if you don't mind, tell us two things. The thing that the top thing you wanted to bring to your club, and the top thing you saw that you didn't want to bring to the club.
Okay. I'll start with Caroline's, because we talked about Caroline's earlier. Caroline's to me had a great lounge. Had exactly the type of place you'd want to walk into. You'd walk into that lounge and you'd feel like you were on a night out. To me, hanging out in that lounge, you could run into anyone, but you weren't pushed out. You were welcomed, and you could hang there all night if you wanted to. And for a long time, to me, that was the place to hang out, just because of how upscale it was, and there's a little class to it. And, the shows are great, obviously, but for me, it was sort of like a very classy place that accepted all people. And it's great to have that type of home, right? So from Caroline's, we took that classic, that classy feel, and we brought that with us.
And what did you see at Caroline's that you didn't want to bring with you?
And what I didn't want to bring was what they eventually would do, was right after the last show, they would close the bar. And I said, why are they closing the bar? They should just keep it going. And to me, I felt like if they could just still continue to have a great hang and a great business just by staying open after the last show, and they just never did. And that bothered me, so I didn't like that so much.
All right,
And then the cellar to me was, look, it's the classic. They have the best comedians, and we wanted to be the place where I had the best comedians, but also we're very much curating it under our own style, what we liked, and eventually what would happen is you would understand that it can't just be what you like. You have to curate, you have to understand the comedy fan, and that there's something other people want that you may not want, and you have to give that type of comic that fair chance. And I think the Cellar did a great job curating something for everybody. And I think that's still why they're one of the best clubs in the world.
And what didn't you take with you?
What I hated, and I still can say this, and what I didn't like was the lines. I think the lines, telling somebody they have to wait in line in the freezing cold weather, and then as soon as the show's over, you kick them out on the street because you needed to get the next herd in there. That herd thing, that mentality, the in and out thing, it bothered me because it was such a great place, and you didn't want your night to end, but you didn't have a choice. You were out the door, and before that, you were outside. So you always felt like you couldn't get an access to the comedians, even though they were at that table. It always felt awkward being there because they didn't want you there. They didn't want the fan there.
One of the things I never understood about the original Comedy Cellar is why they didn't have people exit up the stairs into the Olive Tree, where it's a beautiful hang,
amazing place, and good food,
and get the business there. But there might have been a situation where there's too many people up there.
I don't know, but we never cowered from that. Like we'll welcome as many people as want to come and hang out the bar and the restaurant. I just don't see a reason for there to be a line outside ever. So
one of the things in business and life that we find in all kinds of businesses are the multimillionaires, the billionaires who just decide, hey, I'm going to own the Dodgers, we're going to own the Dodgers, and we're just going to overspend, and we're going to just put the best team on the field, and we're going to overpay everybody, and we'll always get the best people. And eventually we're going to be known as the best franchise, and we're going to win the championship. But we may not make money right away. We may lose money. Why in comedy do you think there's not some billionaire who just opens a comedy club, starts paying comedians $1,000 a set to do a 20-minute set, and then they'll just get every great comedian and they'll never have to worry about anything else? Why doesn't that exist here?
I don't know. And I know that if I could pay comics stat per spot, I would do it. We used to, on our produced shows before we ever opened, we used to overpay comedians money we didn't have just because we wanted to show them how much we appreciated them. It was probably the wrong thing to do because, we were losing money all the time. But, what else? How else can you show them that how much, what they do is special? You're trying to monetize that somehow. You're trying to show them, hey, what you're doing is special. Being on our show is special. Being part of our club eventually is special. And I feel like one day that'll get there. I hope it's us. And I hope we can do that. I mean, anything's possible, I guess.
Got it.
1,
2,
3,
4,
5,
5,
6.
6 degrees of separation.
6 degrees of separation. I'm going to mention some names, and I want to just tell our audience something that comes to mind. It could be a sentence. It could be a quick little tidbit. It could be a word. It could be anything.
Be bad at this.
All right. And I think I'll just go with some of the people that I have enormous respect for. The originality of their comedy, their voice, their cadence, their style, and their ability to show the world that there's something special there. So, Mark Norman.
You want me to tell you what's special about him?
Anything that comes to mind for you. Could be a little story. Anything could be like a little...
Consistency. He is never not funny, and even when he thinks he's bombing, he's brilliant. I think there's no other person that has that type of workhorse mentality like that. I mean, he'll do 9 spots in one night and like not even feel it. And to me, a guy who works that hard to make sure he can get to perfection is, you can't say enough good things about that.
One of his partners in crime that I can just say his first name, and Sam.
Sam Morril is lethal. I mean, the guy is fearless. I've never seen a set from Sam that held back. The guy just doesn't give a shit what you think, and it's great. I mean, he's one of those guys that you think comedy for, because he doesn't care. He'll say whatever he wants. Jim
Gaffigan.
Oh, he's like Papa Bear. Papa Bear. I love Jim because he's just so giving of his time. Just such an interesting person. He's a great family man. He really shows people that you can have a great career and a family at the same time. And he's, I think, paved the path for comedians in that way. I think a lot of people think that they can't have it all. He has it all.
Dave Attell.
My favorite guy to hang out with. And at late night, he's just, off the wall. He showed everybody that you could be off the wall. And that comedy's okay. Like you can do crazy shit and say crazy shit, and just everybody loves him. I mean, he's one of those guys. He's one of those guys in New York City comedy that you'll never forget. He's like we're gonna have to have some statues erected of David Attell when it's all said and done.
Bill Burr.
I mean, to me, he's probably the best comedian in the world. He and I fight over how bad Italian pastries are. So he'll call me at 2 a.m. and tell me. So, things like a guy like that cares that much about making your life, like ruining your day. He wants to call me to tell me how bad Italian pastries are. Just, it's for his own self, and I just think he loves making himself crack up, and it's what makes him such a great comedian, because he's making himself laugh first. And Bill's such a generous person, a great dude, just, all the things he's done over the years for Patrice O'Neal's family. He's really looked out for the comedy scene. Just a selfless guy.
Gary Gulman.
Oh man, I mean, to peel the layers of Gary Gulman, to have seen him do that to himself over the years. When I first saw Gary, he was just a fucking fantastic comedian, but over the years, he's opened himself up to everybody and shown everybody his vulnerability. It's amazing to see a comic be that vulnerable. Big J. Okerson. Oh, God. We produced 2 seasons of his show called What's Your F***ing Deal? It's a crowd work series that we produced for a platform called CISO. This is how much I love that show, and I love Big J. For the last 5 years, I've done nothing but try to get that show back from NBC. And literally, I can tell you that I We got it back just like a few weeks ago.
Right.
And it will be on Wits.
Persistence, everybody.
You should watch it on Wits. It's going to be on Wits. It'll be on other platforms as well. But that show was so special to me, to Dave, and to Jay, obviously. I was able to do something on that show that I thought I could never get done, and that was watch Tony Clifton walk the room. And because of that, it'll always be the best thing I've ever done. Because I brought Tony Clifton out of retirement, and I got to see him just walk in the time out at the bitter end where we filmed, and it was special. And those moments like that, you really hold dear because you got to accomplish something together with somebody.
Well, lastly, let's go back to somebody who I think is really special and unique and original, and who checks in with you, Nikki Glaser.
I mean, Nikki, man, I remember before we had a club, she was just somebody we had an eye on. We just loved her stand-up, you know? And I called her one day and I said, hey, I know you're moving to New York. Why don't we put you up at the Cellar and get you passed? You know, like, why don't we're doing this showcase for them, and you should be on it. And she said, absolutely. She flew in that day just for our showcase, and I never forgot it. She got passed. And from then on, she just became a staple in New York City, and now she's a superstar, and she deserves it because she works her ass off, and she writes her own jokes, which is always... You know, you always wonder when somebody gets to a certain level if they're still writing their own jokes. She does. And she's an amazing human being who gives her time. And, you know, I know that, you know, a lot of people have expressed over the years Dave's loss. She's been the one that's brought it up more than anyone else. And to be able to, you know that she's thinking about him despite all the things that she's been doing and accomplishing. I mean, like, the fact that she thinks of Dave, to me, is, you know, just tells you what kind of person she is.
Awesome. Yeah. Your proudest moment in show business.
Oh my God. Proudest moment in show business. Jesus Christ. I think it's taking somebody like Ian Lara. Ian Lara is a comedian that literally was doing open mics and bringer shows on Saturdays at the Stand. And someone saying, hey, I think you should see this. And you're like, why is this guy on this show? He should be elevated. And to do that, to take a guy from the lowest point of stand-up and watch him, you know, do the Tonight Show. It's the pinnacle. It's taking someone from the ground all the way up.
And this is something incredible that the audience should know about artists. And it's so mind-boggling when you think about it. But you mentioned Dane Cook, right?
Yep.
You know, one of the proudest moments of his life should be special. One of the proudest moments in his life, I presume, would be selling out a Madison Square Garden or whatever it is, let's say, and doing 2 shows in one night. Nobody does that. 39,000 people. But yet, he could have made, and I'm just saying, I know how much he made, but let's just presume, if you just do the numbers like a regular human being,
right,
that it's going to be somewhere hovering around the $2 million mark, okay? And merch on top of that.
Right.
But yet, I know for a fact one of the proudest moments of his life was hosting Saturday Night Live, not only the first time, but the premiere episode of one of the seasons.
Right.
And you do that, and you make $5,000. You work for 7 days or 6 days. You work 100 hours. You go to Madison Square Garden, you work one night, you make $2 million. You work SNL, $5,000.
Right.
and yet it's seen by millions and millions of people. So what he just said about Ian Lara, I hope I pronounced that properly.
Yes, Ian Lara. Yep.
So Ian, you know, that moment on the Tonight Show.
Yeah. Well, it was special to us because he has HBO special, he has Comedy Central specials, but the Tonight Show is the Tonight Show, and it was a goal of his when we all started working together. Dave said to him, "You will be on the Tonight Show. I promise you that." And unfortunately, Dave wasn't there to see it, and it's probably he can tell you it's probably his most favorite moment, but it's also bittersweet at the same time. And I think for all of us that night was a realization that again, you can find somebody in the lowest rung of comedy, and his career is certainly not finished. He's got tons of things he's going to be accomplishing in his lifetime, but that moment that was spoken out and said, I need to get on the Tonight Show, and for Dave to say that won't be a problem, it'll happen, and then it does, and it's an amazing moment to witness. And obviously he crushes, and he's been back now 4 or 5 times, and there's nothing like it. There really isn't anything like it. It was a wonderful moment for all of us.
Amazing. Now, besides what we've talked about with Dave, in business, what has been your biggest disappointment? That not a tragedy, but your biggest disappointment that's fueled you to take your career to the next level?
I worked on a pilot for Warner Brothers and NBC with a comedian named Vladimir Camaño, who's one of my favorite comedians. Love the guy. He's like one of my best friends. And Vlad worked so hard on this thing, and we had everything in our favor. Bill Lawrence was the showrunner. Vlad was up and coming star. He had just done Variety's most I don't know what the hell that thing is, whatever that Variety's best comics to watch or something like that. And
Bill Lawrence, one of the greatest showrunners of all time.
I mean, like anything he touches, and we were told it's going to get picked up for a 6-episode order.
The Kiss of Death.
Jesus, I'm sorry, Chris, but the guy at the head of Warner Brothers at the time, the guy was there for such a long time. Do you remember?
Peter Roth.
Such a
the guy
great
who
dude.
Hugged everybody. He probably couldn't do that today.
Hugged me, hugged Vlad, hugged my father. All kinds of people. He just hugged anybody who was around. He was so sure of it. And something called stacking rights got in the way.
Stacking rights.
Warner Brothers and NBC could not agree on stacking rights, and the order was canceled.
And to this day, you don't know what stacking rights is.
And I'm like, what the f*** is it? Well, apparently what they say is that it's where it lives after it airs. But, I mean, who cares, man? Like, it was such a great show. It was an amazing show. It was almost flawless. The cast was amazing. He was amazing. Bill Lawrence was amazing.
Well, now you have stacking rights with Big J. Okerson's show, so now you're all set. Now you know what stacking rights is.
Here's Vlad, right? All these years later, doesn't forget about it. He's in the middle right now of developing one of the best one-man shows I've ever seen, based on what we filmed that day.
Again,
and
the tragedy of something not going
turns
forward.
it into this other piece, and he's recording. He wrote 5 original songs. Are a Grammy-winning artist, and it's music and comedy combined. It's one of the most electric one-man shows I've ever seen, in the vein of something like John Leguizamo. And I can't wait for everyone to see it. It's just going to build a lot of momentum over the next few months, and then hopefully, it'll be out for the masses. So.
And again, this is what if you study Vlad, and if you study Jeffrey Ross, 30 years ago, I worked on a one-person show with him that got his own television show going about the loss of his grandfather, and he lived with called Take a Banana for a Ride. 30 years later, he's bringing it back in a different way and touring the country with it.
And it's amazing to see the process. It's amazing. And to be part of it, for them to allow us to be part of that is also what is so enriching and rewarding about the business sometimes.
Last question. You've seen it all. What advice do you have for the young comedian who's starting out, who wants to have the kind of career of all of the levels of comedians we've mentioned? They come in, they walk in, they're trying to prepare and start their journey with you. What is it they can do, both personally, professionally, all around, to have the kind of career that those comedians have that we've talked about, and also just, amend it a little bit to also the people behind the scenes who want to open a comedy establishment, want to stand out, and want to have the kind of career that you and your partners are having.
I've met so many new comedy club owners over the last 2 or 3 years that all look at us and say, you guys are why we're doing this. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I mean, if I could tell you the struggle we have every day, it's insane. But I mean, if people really want to do this business, they have to love it first, because you have to be kind of crazy to do this to yourself. It's somewhat torturous, Barry. It's torturous. I mean, you have to be willing to really take punishment because you love it so much. And if you love it so much, then it doesn't really matter what it does to you, because you'll keep fighting to get to the place you want to get to. And the advice I have for comedians is, don't be in such a rush to get signed or get seen. Just be great, man. And like, there's this kid that I just saw, Christian Weckesser. He's just this amazing kid, and he never asked for any of it. He just went out and performed. He's never asked anybody for anything, but you can just tell he's going to be on the cusp of something, and it's because he just worked at it. And if you work at it, that's all that matters. Just keep working at it. And as far as people that want to get in the industry, I did it in the most non-traditional way. I was a journalist. I produced a pilot. Then I got into management. I produced some shows around New York City, got popular, did a college tour, and then somehow wound up with a comedy club. And, I just think that if you have the drive, depending on where you want to be in this business, whether you want to be an agent, a producer, learn the industry, learn the ins and outs of the industry from the people who love it. And if you do that, then you'll find yourself in a much better position. If you just find yourself working with someone that's doing it for the money, I think that's a complete waste of time, because money's not why we do this, Barry. I mean, the reason why you've been here for as long as you have is because you love it. And if you don't love it, if money is the only thing driving you, then this isn't for anybody. You have to really love this to be in it. So that's what I'd say. Love it. You have to love it. So.
Well, Cris, I love this, and thank you so much for taking the time to doing this. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
It was worth the wait, brother.
Again, I'm not worthy of this podcast, everyone.
You are so worthy.
I'm sorry we just dragged you to the last.
You are so worthy. Congratulations.
If anyone's disappointed, and there's a free tickets for you to win the show.
Thanks, Barry.
Thanks.